Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody. Oh, here's Alex. We're going to give it a few minutes and let some more people join in. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine, Jen.
Okay, perfect. Let's turn my volume up so I can hear you. Hi, Alex. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, hi everybody.
Okay. Let's see. I took these AirPods out. Can you guys, we're still good to go, right?
Yeah, you sound fine, Jen. I don't think the AirPods are interfering at all.
Okay, awesome. Maybe we'll give it another minute or two, let some more people join in, and then we can begin. Super excited for it, though. Thank you, guys. You know what? Let's just do it. I'm excited. Let's just start.
Yeah, let's
I'll
start.
introduce myself. I'm Jen. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I am super excited to have Alex Mashinsky, CEO and co-founder of Celsius Network, and Mark Richardson, head of research at Bancor, joining me tonight. We're basically just going to discuss CEFI, DeFi, even traditional finance, the comparisons, kind of how they're overlapping right now. I've noticed a lot of overlapping in the space, and I kind of thought you two would be perfect to have on as a guest to really help me kind of explain it, break it down. I'm really hoping that not only do we have people from our own communities here joining us tonight, but also maybe new users or soon to be, hopefully, new users of CeFi and DeFi. Um, I have to tell you before we start, as I'm organizing this AMA, though, I get this letter from my high yield savings account. Thankfully, I kind of ditched that when I discovered crypto in the space, but they were congratulating me on my new increased APY of 0.5%.
Yeah,
And
it's amazing.
it's amazing. It really, really is. And half of me was kind of laughing about it. And then half of me was just kind of thinking, like, this is sad, for anybody who's getting this letter and they're so excited for this. And it really makes me that much more excited to have you guys on here tonight and really kind of hopefully help people really kind of understand what CeFi and DeFi are and how they can use this to their advantage and how they're not just stuck in traditional finance.
Yeah, sure. Well, how would you like to? How should we start the conversation?
Well, I'm
Maybe,
kind of curious. Go ahead.
yeah. I was going to say maybe like one of the things that I generally tell people that are brand new to cryptocurrency or brand new to DeFi um, is that it reminds me a lot of, at least the DeFi projects do, remind me a lot of these online only high interest savings accounts from like the late 90s and early 2000s. So I know that we've got people from all around the world listening right now, this was a pretty controversial and confusing time in Australia when I was a teenager. There was I think a Dutch investment firm called ING, and they started an online only savings account called ING Direct. And what was interesting is that at the time, I think that the interest rate was about 1%. Or something like 2%. That the major banks were offering on their savings accounts, but ING Direct was offering like 5%. And then shortly after that, Asanda Group from New Zealand opened up their online-only savings account, which was like 6%. And then Ubank, which was a startup sort of spin out from the National Bank of Australia, opened up a similar project, and it was offering something like 6%. But the point is that at the time, it was deeply confusing for customers because they were being told that this is a bank account where you transfer your money into it using the internet, right? Which was already was an alienating concept for many, because the internet was still not, it didn't have anywhere near the saturation levels that it does today. We were still on maybe 512 kbs dial-up modems back then, so it was it was an infrastructure that not necessarily everyone had access to, and even if you did have access to it, it wasn't particularly good. But if you had one of these accounts, you didn't have an ATM card. You couldn't use a checkbook. There was no branch of any bank somewhere that you could go to withdraw your money. It was a very, very confusing time. But I'd say that the younger generations, right? So the people that were sort of maybe getting their first job around about that time, were starting to think about saving money, that kind of thing. These were the guys that were gravitating very, very quickly towards this internet banking paradigm, and were for the first time deciding not to ever get a checkbook, right, and not to worry too much about ATM cards and things like that. And they were putting a lot of this money into these online savings accounts. And I think that in a way, a lot of the DeFi projects now are starting to look a lot like that. And in a way, they're kind of borrowing from the same sort of fundamental principles that allow for some of these APRs to be a lot higher. So, for example, with the online savings account paradigm, it was really about cutting out all of the unnecessary overhead, right? If you don't need a branch, then you don't need a branch manager, and you don't need, to pay rent on the building that it resides in. You don't need to, pay for document verification on checks and all that kind of stuff. It was like how you strip everything out and just get back to the bare metal, right? And just have the represent what a savings product would be. And that's kind of why the interest rate could be higher, because it made the banks that were offering these things, it cost them less to run that product, and what they could do with the capital that they had there was also more nimble. I need to look back into this, but I'm pretty sure that when you were using these high interest savings accounts, you actually did give the bank permission to do stuff with the money that it had there, that in traditional savings products that they wouldn't been able to do. So it's I think blockchain and DeFi is very, very similar to that, and that's kind of how I see what's happening. Or at least that's how I talk to DeFi with. That's how I talk about DeFi with brand new participants, and yeah, I suppose that's probably as good a place to start the conversation as any, because it kind of is right at that interface between what DeFi is and what CEFI is doing.
Yeah, so I guess TradFi used to be DeFi. If you look at
Exactly.
we actually last week we announced our chief investment officer. Guess what company he came from? Frank Van Eaton came from ING. So,
Oh, there you go.
I saw that. I think you had two come from TradFi over to Celsius,
right. So
right?
our COO came from Citi, and Frank, our CIO, came from ING. So look, there's not much new under the sun. The question is really, um, banks are the most profitable they've been in history, right? Like JP Morgan, all the banks are printing the best quarters they've ever did, meaning they're making the most money out of our money, right? Because remember, banks don't have any money. They just use your money to make more money. And then they decide, who do they give it to? Do we give it to our customers, or do we give it to our shareholders? And the problem we have is that they know that there's no competition, and every quarter they give all that money to the shareholders. They issue dividends, they give themselves bonuses, and they know that they used to pay 0.1% and nothing would happen. Now they're realizing that money is leaving TradFi, and so they had to raise the rates from 0.1 to 0.5. And beg you to stay, beg you not to close down your account and leave us, right? So I think, just like the internet was a new set of rails back in the 90s, and allowed companies like ING Direct to bypass the old TradFi. Now the blockchain is bypassing effectively the new version of TradFi, right? Even these guys who claim to have high interest accounts, those high interest accounts are 0.5%. So you can do 20 times better than the highest paying TradFi accounts just by using any of the DeFi or CeFi platforms.
Alex, when you first started Celsius, was that kind of your vision? I mean, what Mark was just talking about as far as, like the online high yield savings accounts, it almost kind of reminds me of Celsius because I mean, when I try to onboard people, I always find it easier to onboard them to CeFi if they're completely unfamiliar with the space and then kind of introduce them into DeFi as they become more comfortable. Some aren't, I don't want to hold my keys. I want to deposit my money. Was that kind of your vision when you first created Celsius?
Yeah, so when we started, people called us a scam, and they accused us of every bad word you can imagine, right? Because there was no DeFi in 2017, right? So I think it was heresy to talk about anything that was several percentage point. I think we launched the service with like 6%, and then we went to 8, and then we went to 10, and then we went to 12, and now it's back to 8.5. But the point was that people just could not believe that paying these kind of rates was either sustainable or real or relied on any kind of economics. They were sure that it was either a gimmick and it was just not going to scale. People kept telling me, "Well, you have 100 million. Wait until you have a billion." And then we had a billion, and they said, "Well, wait until you have 5 billion." And 10 and 20, and then we crossed 30, and they were like, "Well, we don't know what to say anymore." Like, because now you have 100 competitors who try to copycat everything you guys are doing, and they all seem to be paying yield. So something is definitely broken. And again, go to the bank statements, go to their, it's all public information. They file with the SEC every quarter. They tell you in their statement how much money they're making, right? They're saying, hey, they brag to Wall Street. I made 17% return on capital. I made 16%. I made 15%. So the question is not, is it possible? The question is, who gets all that money that they're making, right? So I want to make another very important point that many people miss when they talk about TradFi, right? So banks have like a secret weapon, and the weapon is called fractional reserves, meaning they only, well, now it's zero. They used to have to keep 10% uh, in reserves, and they could lend the rest out, right? So they had 10x leverage. Now the Fed requires bank to have zero in reserves, right? So the outcome of that is that when you withdraw, right? So when Jen basically laughs at that statement that she gets for 0.5%, the inquiry or the solicitation, and she withdraws, let's say $1,000 from the bank has to extinguish at least $10,000 worth of loans, because when they lose that deposit, they have to eliminate all the leverage that they had against that deposit, right? So most people, everybody on this call who thinks you're too small to have any impact on a bank, you have at least a 10x leverage, 10x. You have 10 times as much leverage as you think, just because of fractional reserve. Because fractional reserve works both ways. It works when you make a deposit, it allows the bank to do a big things, right? Issue much more money. And when you withdraw it, it works in reverse. So as we, all of us, withdrew trillions of dollars and moved them into crypto over the last decade, banks had to shrink their lending desks, had to shrink their mortgage desk, all of their, all of their derivatives and everything else. So that's a very important point that many times people don't understand.
You think about 10x, and that's not something that I personally mess with. But then when you kind of put it in that perspective, it hits a little bit differently because I know I personally was unaware of that with TradFi. So when they didn't DeFi wasn't around when you first started Celsius. When DeFi first came around, what was your thought on it? Because now you're kind of branching out. And I mean, you've been completely transparent with everything that you do with funds that Celsius holds. You know, you've been working with different projects, Bancor included. You know, what was
Well,
your initial thought?
yeah, most people also don't know that Bancor was the original AMM, right?
Right.
No, most people think it's Uniswap or think they give you some other names, but really, I think Bancor kind of really invented this whole category. Just like Celsius invented yield, I think Bancor was the founders or the originators of this concept that you can have an automated market maker. And again, you have to think of CEFI and DeFi as like the left arm and the right arm. It's not like are your two arms competing with each other, or do they help each other? Sometimes you do something with one arm, you do something else with a different arm, right? They have different functions, but together they always perform better because, again, if there's 8 billion people on this planet, again, the vast majority of them, 99.999% of them, are not capable of managing their keys or knowing or learning all this tech. And really, you need to layer it, right? For some of them, you need to make it simple, real simple, so it looks just like their Facebook account or their email account or whatever. And for some of them who are more sophisticated, you might give them more advanced tools, allow them to use much more of the functionality. But CeFi and DeFi really work together. If you read Vitalik's latest post, right? I mean, I have it on my Twitter. If you haven't read it, I mean, he's saying, look, I think the future is a combination of decentralized and centralized services delivering full functionality that basically is going to replace TradFi, right? So some things can be fully decentralized, others can't, and it's a question of how do you stitch the two together to enable the rest of the money to move from TradFi into this new world, right? How do you build
Yeah.
those bridges and roads to bring all those people over?
I think that's an interesting point there as well, and I agree with both yourself and Vitalik on this. That I don't consider DeFi and CeFi to be two different types of finance, right? There is only one type of finance, right? There's as you said earlier in the conversation, right? There's nothing really new under the sun. The same financial instruments that are being built in DeFi have existed in traditional finance for decades, if not centuries, right? There's the ability to loan assets out for an interest rate on those is not new, right? We've had that probably for about 10,000 years. The fact that we can now do
Mark, I think we lost you for a minute.
I think TradFi blocking his account,
Let's see. He's requested.
Yeah,
to
he just
speak again.
dropped. But look, it's just to continue the train of thought. The opportunity, Mark, you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry about that.
All right, no worries.
Twitter has a habit of dropping me from these calls every once in a while. But yeah, just finishing off that thought, finance is what it is, and it's the approach that you take to it that kind of distinguishes DeFi and CeFi. So if you've got a particular task or a goal in mind, whether it's performing an exchange of assets and paying a commission, or lending out assets against a collateral for an interest rate, it doesn't really that function is not it has no knowledge of whether or not it was performed in a centralized or decentralized way. You get more or less the same outcome. It's really the rest of us, right? It's the people that are participating in that system that value the either the centralized component or the decentralized component. And I don't think that there's necessarily a winner, right, or an obvious an obvious winner with regards to whether or not it should be decentralized or centralized. I think for most of the people on this call, and myself included, we like the idea that with the decentralized component, that you are able to sort of avoid the kind of corruption that has led to banks, for example, paying their stockholders 17% dividends while paying the people that actually provide the capital a 0.1% interest rate, right? That kind of behavior is disgusting. And decentralization, at least in part, or participating in a decentralized financial project, allows you to sort of skirt around that, because if you provide the capital, you get the you get the yield from it, and I think the decentralized products are generally better at achieving that than centralized products are. But there's a flip side, and that it kind of comes back to why I think that we ended up with centralized products at all. And that is that, no matter how secure your computer is, or how many steps you've taken to make sure that you've memorized your seed phrase and it's not recorded anywhere or something like that, someone can always bully you into giving up that information, right? I think that it's called the wrench attack, right? Meaning that if someone threatens you with violence, generally you can break any of the currently employed cryptographic securities that we use to secure our finances. And so it's this idea of self-custody being the norm might not be a great idea. And having centralized services that provide some of that custodial service, I do think is important, and I think that there will always be this balance between how much is centralized and how much is decentralized, and I think that that's the lowest layer, right, of the risk, right? It's the can you even protect your own cryptographic secrets? But then above that is, okay, let's say that you can. Do you know enough about these financial instruments in order to manage your risk well? And I think that that's kind of where Bancor is also kind of entering into this spectrum, even within DeFi, right? We're still, I would say, very much not CeFi. But even within that DeFi layer, there are projects that allow you to be exposed to different relative levels of risk. And some of those projects are going to be much more consumer facing, much more mass market, which is what I want Bancor to be. And then some of those products are much more niche, right? Much more specialist facing. Things like Uniswap v3 that require you to know a little bit about hedging and how to rebalance your position and things like that. So I think that there's kind of a spectrum of relative risk, and it's like most of the risk off components become more centralized, and most of the risky components become more decentralized. But yeah, at the heart of it, there is still only the same financial engine performing the same activities. It's just how you interact with it that changes whether or not it's a decentralized or centralized product.
Yeah, so I want to unpack something Mark just mentioned, because I think it's important. So you heard, I'm sure most of you heard this expression before, that money always goes to where it's treated best. And you see trillions of dollars moving every day between financial markets, between London and Japan and New York and other Singapore and so on, other places around the world. And all that money movement is actually driven by large financial institutions, hedge funds, different financial players. We, until recently, could not participate in any of that. So all of us, the people who actually created all this money, right? We went to work. We basically swapped our time in exchange for some kind of a payment, a salary, and then that money went into some institution, which is the toll collector, and they were the ones deploying or moving money to where it did the most good. What blockchain does, what companies like Bancor and Celsius and others are doing, is that they're basically for the first time allowing any one of us to move our money to where it's doing the most good, right? So suddenly we're not clogged or locked in our Merrill Lynch account or in our Fidelity account or whatever else, but suddenly we can bypass all of these toll collectors, all of these gatekeepers, right, and participate directly in any market that we want, but we need to have some specialized knowledge to do that, right? So again, what companies like Celsius do is we say, look, with Celsius, you don't need to have any knowledge, right? You just decide who you trust. Do you want to trust your TradFi financial institution, or you can trust Celsius? And if Celsius thinks that one of the places to extract yield is, is on Bancor, then it will allocate capital to Bancor, which will provide liquidity and provide the services necessary for Bancor to operate, right? Because for all these DeFi protocols to run, they need the people who need to exchange matched with people who want to provide liquidity, and so on, so on. So the free markets, as we know them, that were limited to these very large players, are basically opened up for anyone. And now you have this, I call it the Cambrian explosion, right, of innovation that is basically allowing anyone, a person from anywhere on the planet, to write a protocol or fork an existing protocol, right, and do something a little bit better, and billions of dollars will show up overnight. It's unheard of, right? That suddenly money can move so quickly and basically adopt something so new, because it represents this new capability that was not available before. So the this matching of the liquidity and the speed of finance with the innovation that's happening with, again, CEFI and DeFi, is why there's so much excitement about this industry. And again, the best minds on the planet are leaving Google, leaving Amazon, leaving Facebook, and are coming to this industry because everybody is realizing that value creation here is happening much faster than even in what used to be the hottest companies on in Silicon Valley.
Sorry, we lost Mark again. I'm going to get him back on. I think what you were saying, though, is there's this level of understanding and let's see, let's get him on here, and knowledge, so if you're not understanding, how does Celsius make me this money? How does Bancor make me this money? You know, you have a level of experience, you have a level of knowledge, you have a level of risk that you're willing to take. And depending on what those all are, something in this space, whether it's Celsius or Bancor or any of the others that are out now, can fit that. And you're not just stuck with TradFi. And it's not just users, like you said, it's all of the minds that are coming and working in this space, as opposed to, they see that just as well as we do.
Well, I would just add that, look, it's very hard to keep up with all this innovation. There are hundreds of projects that are launching every month. And frankly, I don't know anyone who's up to speed on all of them, right? So it's very hard to know what is a scam and what is is like an unsafe code, right? Who's here to stay, who's just passing by, right? So there's a lot of, and I think that's why regulators are also very concerned about what's going on, because it's very hard to figure out who's a good player and who's a bad player, right? So
Yeah,
obviously, many people are doing it for the right reason. I think obviously Bancor and Celsius are great examples of high quality companies, but it's very hard to dig into some of these new projects and see what they're all about.
I think that there's, and maybe speaking about the state of DeFi for just a few minutes. And I want to reiterate a lot of that sentiment we just heard from Alex, that it is extremely difficult to determine whether or not a new cryptocurrency project, not only is it legitimate, but does its value proposition make any sense at all? And it's becoming more and more abstract. And this is partially complicated because at some level, the way that humans value stuff is also abstract. But I would say that we can still kind of know economic and financial truth, right? I don't think that everything is so meaningless that we can't sort of draw a line in the sand and say, no, this kind of approach will never work, and these kinds of approaches might work, right? I think that we can do that. And what's interesting is that and this is true of traditional finance as well, right? We've always had companies like Herbalife and other MLM companies, which are essentially just pyramid schemes. And in cryptocurrency and DeFi, we have the same problems. And I think a big part of that issue is the narrative drive, right? The fact that CT holds so much sway over what we all kind of are collectively fed as being good financial advice, even though the phrase "not financial advice" is thrown around, at the bookend of all of this discussion. And on this call, I'm certainly not going to point the finger at anyone, right? I'm sure that we all have strong opinions on which DeFi protocols are worthwhile and which ones aren't really doing anything. But it is a pretty big problem, and it means that when you're trying to evaluate the risk of participating in something, if you don't have a pretty good financial background, right, or if you haven't spent any time sort of wondering about revenue models or what can be considered reasonable inflation, for example. A lot of what's happening in DeFi is inflationary reward systems. A lot of this stuff is really frightening, that the average Twitter user who might not have a huge amount of financial experience or the ability to process just how complicated some of these models are, is being actively sort of encouraged, swept away by the wave of enthusiasm for these new kinds of economic and financial ideas. And I think that is, for me, just talking about the state of DeFi, it's a problem. Like it's easy to get kind of dark on DeFi these days. And I agree with Andre Cronje. He will often tweet stuff that's a lot less than optimistic about the state of DeFi, and I think a lot of the stuff contained in his tweets is showing a lot of wisdom. And I think that every once in a while, I would really wish that the entire DeFi community would just kind of stop and have like a period of sober reflection on whether or not some of the major moves that have been made make sense. Because in my opinion, there's nothing particularly complex about how to build a successful business model. You still need to be offering something like a service that other people find valuable, and you need those people that are wanting to use that service to pay to pay fees, revenue, commissions, whatever you want to call it, into that system, such that the balance, right? The cost of doing business is offset by the revenue that it generates. In my opinion, all financial products at some point have to come back down to that. Even things like risk transfer instruments and other things, although they seem abstract and complicated, they're really not. It's really how much is someone willing to pay in order to feel more secure about this risk that they've taken on, or how much is someone willing to pay in order to not have to sell this thing that they've attached themselves to. And in a lot of DeFi products, you can find no discernible business model, right? It is something that is completely brand new, and maybe, right? I have to, I have to put this out there that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are going to be brand new business models, brand new ways of generating value that we've never seen before, and cryptocurrency and blockchain is going to be the way that we do it. But the skeptic in me wants to think that probably that's not the case, right? That probably the way to generate money on blockchains is going to be the same as we generated money off of blockchains. Blockchains is just a new way of doing it. It doesn't mean that the thing itself that generates value has any, is any different. And I just wanted to point that out, right? Because when Alex was talking about these different levels of risk, it's not just risk with regards to using an instrument that we know works. Some of the instruments in DeFi, we don't actually know if they mean anything. And it's an interesting position to be in, where I don't think that centralized finance struggles with this as much, right? The regulators generally keep pretty close pretty close guards against stuff that is obviously a scam coming out of the woodwork. Whereas in DeFi, though, we don't really have those checks. And in some cases, I'm convinced that even the project creators themselves aren't aware that they've created a scam, right? Like, it's not a deliberate scam. It's not a nefarious intent project. But that's all I think I wanted to say about it.
Yeah. So all of our efforts, right? It doesn't matter if it's CEFI or DeFi. They all kind of stem from Satoshi's innovation, right? Of creating this beautiful mechanism of proof of basically having a ledger, having proof of work or proof of stake, right? Being able to avoid double spend, and then now the question is, what are you going to create on top of it? So the question is, are we copying the worst things from Wall Street or from the central banking system?
Right.
Or are we creating something that is? I mean, are we sticking with like Austrian economics, or are we expanding on modern monetary theory and all these crazy things that, for example, the Fed or the Bank of Japan are pushing, right? Because, for example, yield from real economic activity, like what Celsius is doing, looks exactly the same as yield from inflationary money printing or token printing. The average person that is using DeFi or CeFi could not tell you the difference between, okay, yield that was created because an institution or an exchange paid fees, or yield that was created because basically more users adopted a certain DeFi platform and the token value went up, right? Or so it's on us, right? It's on us as the creators or the of these platforms to really educate the community and explain to people, okay, we are building the future of finance, and in that future, we are not inviting MMT. We're not inviting all these crazy theories that you can print as much as you want and nothing bad ever happens, right? And that's what seems to be now propagating across DeFi like a brush fire, and no one can put an end to it. So
Well,
obviously,
I'm not
there's
so.
a lot. Just to finish,
Sure.
right? So the if you think of, and I just reposted a debate that I had with Rune from Maker. This is almost 2 years old debate, and if you listen to it, and you listen to what Andre is saying, you listen to what Vitalik is saying, and so on and so on. I think most of the OGs in the space are all telling you the same thing. It's the same thing Mark is saying, right? But greed is taking over, right? And people are leaning easily towards all of these fake inflationary yield platforms as if they're sustainable, thinking that the two are the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy because it's easy to be fooled, right? Because I guess when you're participating in these kinds of inflationary mechanics, all you see is that your four-figure APY or whatever it is that's being generated on your on your wallet. But I do think that there is evidence that the industry is kind of learning to self-regulate, which is interesting. I think that in the beginning, with SushiSwap sort of kicking off the liquidity mining craze, it really was that if you had to categorize the attitude, it was that there are no consequences. We can just have 15-figure APYs, 16-figure APYs, and everything is going to be fine. And I have seen more recently people continue to think that this stuff is okay, right? That there are a lot of sort of bonding, I think, DeFi 2.0 bonding protocols that continue to sort of echo that sentiment. But I have started to see people question it, right? It's no longer taken as gospel that those kinds of APYs are meaningful or sustainable. And it is interesting to see DAOs then start to take on the characteristics of a regulator and start to bring out their own monetization policy saying, no, that, inflation should be capped at these levels, or it should be curtailed, or, we need to invent like unlock periods or slow vesting rates and things like that. And it's just interesting to see that DeFi left unto its own devices eventually sort of created all of the same, or it looks to be creating all of the same regulations that I think might have been imposed on it had we invited regulators in the first place.
So Celsius is managing to pay these yields and be deflationary, right? So we have a burn mechanism, and we're deflationary, right? That's like the dream of every protocol, is to get to the point where they are deflationary. So I think you have yin and yang all in one industry, right? Kind of, and they are very confused mob, right? That is just hungry for yield, trying to figure out, okay, where is it safe, where is it not, and even I know people who got burned several times, right? Falling for rug pulls or for scams or for all these things, and they continue to place bets. It's like going to the casino and hoping you're going to hit the number. And sooner or later, I think people are going to learn, right? Because it doesn't matter what APY you're earning. If you get few of those hits where you lose all your money, you always end up behind and not ahead of where you are. So I think I agree with you. I think it's going to be a combination of self-regulators. DAO, for example, doing, like I saw right now, some of them are requiring 8-year vesting, right? They don't launch unless it's like 8-year vesting for the founders, and which is kind of laughable because, like, at Celsius, we're 4.5 years into the project, and the founders still have 80 or 90% of all their tokens without any lockups, right? So good projects, I think, are not going to need that, but I think all these rules do help. But I think regulators are going to come in as well and kind of set an example, or take some of these things and show to people that there are consequences to misbehaving. And then I think it's going to be less of a Wild West.
I think that's kind of one of the questions that I had. You guys had brought up regulation, regulators a couple of times just now. And I think a lot of people in this space are anti-regulation. But when you kind of step back and look at, like you said, the Wild West, you kind of need to work with the regulators to a certain extent. I mean, you guys obviously do creating this and working on all of this to be able to do that. But in order for the space to really grow and thrive, there would have to be some level of serious cooperation between what's going on here and the regulators themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, fear of regulation is it's partly justified because the entire cryptocurrency space, in a way, is a protest against the overregulation of the financial world. And that's fine, right? Like, why would you create all of this thing that is free of all of the problems that government's created for you, only then to invite them in to ruin it? And I think that's an extreme viewpoint, though. I think that because the cryptocurrency world is already so established, and that there is so much capital in it, and in general, most of the big projects, at least, aren't bad actors, right? Are demonstrably not bad actors, and I think that regulators are going to be, quite pleased to work together with some of these projects. I can't speak for anyone else, but I know that Bancor, when we launched our project, it was as a regulated exchange, right? We kind of even though we created the DeFi concepts with regards to automatic market making, bonding curves, liquidity pools and pool tokens, it was still seen at that time as just being a new fintech type technology, and that the product we created should be treated as a regulated exchange. And so we've had a very long standing relationship with FINMA, the Swiss regulator. And I just want people to know that like regulators aren't these big scary sort of boogeymen that are trying to come in and ruin everything for everyone. In general, they're just trying to make sure that you aren't, going to get into legal trouble, and that you aren't doing anything bad, right? They're trying to like a lot of them really are trying to protect the end user by making sure that we can't, right, just transfer all of the Bancor's liquidity into a dev wallet and just run off with it forever, right? This is why regulations kind of exist, and the regulator in general is a pretty friendly influence on the ecosystem. They're not, they're not just the party poopers that I think everyone thinks that they are. But having said that, I do think that there are some regulation jurisdictions that are more extreme, or some regulatory authorities that are more heavy-handed. Like the SEC, for example, is maybe among the more concerning ones because they're so conservative. But if you have a look outside of just the United States, you'll see that Singapore and Korea, Australia, they've all taken a very pro cryptocurrency policy, and regulators have kind of agreed to be more or less hands off, except for trying to find and weed out and do something about the BitConnects of the cryptocurrency world. So yeah, I think that regulation is going to be a part of crypto. Like even if you don't think it is, it's already a part of cryptocurrency. Like I promise you, any of the project founders who their name are regulatory exposed, right? And so they're talking to lawyers. They're trying to make sure that everything that they do is on the level. They don't want to go to jail for doing something, for doing something on a technical note that's illegal. But I think that it doesn't need to be pervasive. I think that it can be sort of a minimal regulatory environment, and in many ways, the fact that the governments aren't responsible for how these cryptocurrencies are used, or how they're printed, or what their monetization policy is, means that it's actually going to be easier to be for the regulator to be more or less hands off. But we'll see. I think that in general, people are too afraid of it. I don't see it as being overly negative. I think that it can be a happy cooperation. But I'm interested to hear what Alex thinks.
Yeah, so the joke is that you go to three lawyers in the crypto space and you get four opinions, right? So
Yeah.
no one knows what the real answers are, and it's definitely not clear. You're seeing some large companies get in trouble because they think that they got it figured out, and then they get slapped by regulators. Also, in the first few years of crypto, the size of the market was so small that regulators didn't really care. But now, when there's a failure, like if you look at Quadriga, where hundreds of millions of dollars were lost, or Mt. Gox or whatever, I think now regulators are moving very much faster, and they're cracking down much harder, because when something bad happens, you're talking about huge losses for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, right? So I think DeFi is kind of is a little bit in the fringes because it does not require KYC, AML, things that, for example, Celsius did from day one, right? So really, I think there's a lot of scrutiny about that. So you saw, for example, the SEC issue subpoenas to Uniswap and Luna and people like that, because again, there's a disagreement, or the lack of agreement between what DeFi companies think are the kind of standards or the rules, and what the regulators think everybody should be adhering to, and because of that, it's very difficult for projects to really easily kind of evolve and develop. So that's why you're seeing a lot of project launch offshore, or they launch with anonymous founders. Some of it is because maybe they have bad intention, but a lot of it also has to do with some of these founders not wanting to be, no one will run after them. Hence, Satoshi. We still don't know who he or she is. Jen, maybe it's you. Are you Satoshi?
I was a little late to the space to be Satoshi. I'd love to have that brilliant mind, but I'm still I'm still not exactly technical enough for that.
It's exactly
So
what
modest.
Satoshi would say.
Yeah, you're so modest.
Okay, so regulation isn't necessarily bad. What do you guys think about decentralized identity? There's this push for decentralized identity. Do you think that that's going to have any sort of regulation concerns for
Um,
DeFi? So, go ahead, Mark.
it might. I think so. People aren't necessarily aware.
Oh, we dropped him at the people aren't necessarily aware part. Let's give him a minute and see if he can join back in.
Yeah, so I think governments in general are not very happy about this digital money being created or digital identities being kind of coming from other authorities besides themselves, right? So you're gonna have a lot of friction from governments. You see it already, right? Like you're seeing almost every nation talking about CBDCs and how they're gonna use that to kind of compete or replace Bitcoin or other digital money initiative. It's the same thing with identity. Any kind of like, obviously, it would be much better if all of us had a verified digital online identity that worked anywhere on the planet instead of relying on these weird pieces of paper called passports and things that we travel with. But sovereign nations, the two things they control are your identity and money, right? They control the issuance of money.
I think
So
if we
I
would
just
get
don't see them giving that up anytime soon.
I think that I'm sorry that I keep getting dropped. By the way, I think Twitter is trying to force me out of the space, but I think that it can start small. One of the most interesting, what I was trying to say before, what many people don't realize, is that Microsoft has been developing a decentralized identity product for I think the last couple of years now. It's like one of their major focuses in cryptocurrency, and it's intended to replace things like an email as the default source of identity verification online. So at the moment, when when you're signing up for a new service, you're always presented with what would you like to log in with, right? Would you like to log in with your Google account, or would you like to log in with your Twitter account or your Facebook account? So in a way, none of these services ever ask you for your passport or your driver's license. They're always asking you for some other kind of way to identify yourself that is extremely centralized. Right, like I would say now, more people's identities are verified by Facebook than have ever been identified by a passport in the history of civilization. Right, it's just that common, and this is for all kinds of things. Right, you could be signing up for, subscription services like Netflix, and it's going to use primarily the fact that Facebook has verified you before they accept your credit card details. It's interesting, right? I would say that governments already don't issue any kind of useful identifier except for ones that they use themselves. The only time I ever use my passport or my driver's license is when I need to prove who I am to my own government. When I'm trying to prove who I am to anyone else, they ask me for my Google verification. And I think that is problematic. I don't like that the default auditor of my identity online is one of these mega tech companies. I think that it would be better to have something that is more self custody, especially when it comes to your identity. And yeah, there are some let's call them philanthropic sort of efforts towards making that happen. And the one that Microsoft is developing, I think, is actually a fundamental force for good. These things aren't going to be issued by Microsoft. I think they're just creating the architecture for it. But you could imagine how something like this integrated with Chainlink, or another Oracle system could easily create an NFT that uniquely identifies you, and that could be used instead of something like your Google username password combination to join up for these kinds of things. I'm not sure that will ever replace something like a driver's license or a passport or another type of government issued identity for other things, but I think for the majority of things that you actually need to prove your identity for, these kinds of products could certainly compete.
Yeah. So when it comes to money, right? Try to do KYC with your
Yeah,
Google,
yeah,
right? So,
exactly.
so the issue is that obviously on Web 2.0 and maybe even on Web 3.0, we can definitely use our different identities through Google or Facebook or whatever, and all these things are going to interconnect. But when you want to be compliant, you have to, one way or another, it ends up with a government ID and proof of residency and things like that that tie you down,
Yeah,
because at, one way or another, the regulators want to know that they can hold somebody accountable. If something bad happens, they want to collect and make sure people pay taxes, and things like that, right? So they could care less about the good or the speed or the efficiency that the world would have if we all had that universal digital identity. Which, again, just to put things in perspective, to enhance what Mark was talking about, India decided to give everyone in the country digital identity, and Tata did that in less than a year, and that's over 1.2 billion people, right? Half of that population never had an identity. Half of those people never had a government ID or anything like that, right? They just lived in a little town, and never had a bank account or anything like that. So obviously, if India can do it in a year, we can do it in a few years for the entire planet. So this is not a technical issue. This is not a limitations on the blockchain or limitation on. I think Cardano is a good example of somebody who's trying to create a digital identity for everybody on the planet, right? So that's one of their pillars, right? So I think the issue is, again, is the willingness of governments to tax you and to create that ID or retain that ID, and for them to be willing to give it away, or push that authority out to some kind of planetary system instead of a country-based system.
Thank you, guys. And thank you to our listener for sending me that question. That was a question that I just received in a DM, and I appreciate that. That was um, super informative, something that I hadn't actually thought of. I have another question here, and it's kind of off topic. Um, Alex, this one's for you. Do you see Celsius launching an NFT platform anytime soon or at all?
What are NFTs? Can you? No, just kidding. Uh, so, look, they already did penguins and apes and monkeys and whatever. So we have to pick another animal, I guess, right? Is that what the next big thing is all about?
It seems
Um,
to be.
so we do have an NFT initiative. We will be announcing something soon, and but I can't really talk about it yet. And I think that the whole NFT space is definitely something extremely important and innovative, because most people don't realize it, but actually most things on the planet are non-fungible, right? The fungible part, if you look at money or you look at certain things that are fungible, is actually a very small part of our planet, right? So so there's much more to do with non-fungible than with fungible. The problem we're having until now is it's impossible to verify who who actually owns anything, right? So if you go to the so when you look at what actually is being issued, what type of NFTs are being issued and are successful, almost all of them are things that were born digital on with this or that NFT platform, meaning they're very, very new, and their origin or their provenance can be verified very easily because the creator is right here and the creation has happened very, very short period of time ago, right? So, for example, if I created an NFT of a Picasso and I claim to own that Picasso, go validate that that is true and that NFT actually represents any kind of ownership or any kind of relevance to the Picasso, right? So that becomes much more complex than issuing 10,000 penguins and coloring them in different colors and then saying, okay, here's my collection, come buy it for me. So we have to solve those new layers of validation, verification, record the provenance of any of these items in an immutable way. So you can basically rely on that to prove that ownership of an NFT or of certain rights is transferable and is properly recorded. And if that could be done, then there's a huge opportunity to really expand what we're doing in the fungible world, right? All of the DeFi and CeFi, that's all fungible world, into the non-fungible world. So Celsius is focused, as always, we're bridging those different worlds. We're focused on trying to bridge assets that are whose provenance we can prove with the NFT world and really deliver things that have never been available in this digital format to a new set of audience.
Awesome. Thank you. Mark, I have a question for you also.
Yeah.
Does Bancor have any plans to become any sort of a launch pad for new projects?
Yeah, I mean, we've been speaking about this for more than a year. Yes, absolutely. We do want to do this. There's a lot of challenges that I would say face Bancor significantly more than some of the other DEX competitors that we have. I think the things that make us interesting, which are things like single-sided staking and the impermanent loss protection, these can be exploited if we if we aren't careful about how we set up a token launch program. So you could imagine it would be not difficult for a nefarious token launch project who's minting a whole bunch of tokens from nothingness and wants to launch a token on Bancor, that if their desire was to just buy a lot of BNT for free, essentially, that a token launch system like the ones that are happening on like Miso and elsewhere aren't really acceptable, right? It's a catastrophic risk profile for BNT holders and for the Bancor protocol, and we can't tolerate that. But that doesn't mean that we can't do it. It means that we need to be clever about how we deploy it, right? And what its characteristics are. I've spent a lot of time speaking with a bunch of different token launch projects and other people in the space that are trying to figure out how to have a fair token launch. I would say that in general, when a token launch goes badly, or if there's been like a rug pull or something like that, often people sort of attribute it to being the work of an external aggressor against them, right? Like that it was an orchestrated rug pull by the team or by someone else in order to extract value from naive investors. And I would say that that's sometimes true. Maybe even half the time it's true, but often it's also just the market just doing what markets do, right? As soon as someone starts to get fearful of something, they take a dramatic action, and that causes others to take dramatic actions, and the whole thing can kind of snowball away like that. And so designing a good token launch system is not just about protecting against nefarious influences, but also trying to make sure that the whole system remains functional even in the presence of humans doing extremely irrational or behaving irrationally, naively, or impulsively. And we do have a couple of really interesting designs that I think could allow for this. And the one that I'm working on right now it even has the peace of mind of being able to sort of change your mind. I think being able to change your mind is a huge part of consumer spending. That kind of money back guarantee. If you're not satisfied with your purchase, you can return it. I think that could potentially be a big part of these kinds of fundraising campaigns for new token projects, and something that's certainly lacking from a lot of the current offering. But yeah, how to make that gel with things like whitelisting on Bancor and a single-sided staking pool is still it's not just a technical challenge, but it's also an economic challenge. But yes, I'm working on it all the time until we have something like this ready. And we need to be absolutely certain that it's 100% secure. We're never going to release anything that has a security exploit or something else associated with it. So we it's going to take time, but I think we'll get there. Until then, we are collaborating with projects like DAO Maker and Juicebox, who are also, developing their own models for how to make these things function properly during the fundraising stages. And so it could be that maybe it's better to outsource that really chaotic first fundraising phase of a token project to these other specialist launch pads, and then use some sort of graduation system where we sort of provide all of the security requirements that we expect of tokens that are listed on Bancor to these launch pads, and then graduate projects out of the fundraising phase onto sort of a public liquidity phase on Bancor or something like that. So there's no one answer that's going to be the perfect one. It's just a question of what's the most work and what do you get the most value out of. I think personally right now, focusing on V3 and all of the features that we have planned is where our time is best spent, because I still consider new launch stuff to be sort of very, very niche. And so in that sense, collaborating with projects like DAO Maker and Juicebox is probably a better way to spend our time and resources. But as V3 gets established, I think that this is going to be a really important feature that is lacking from the current product offering, and something that we should continue to work on. So yeah, it's never too far outside of our focus. But at the moment is not the number one priority for Bancor.
Very cool. So NFTs on Celsius soon-ish, maybe, and a launch pad on Bancor. I like it. So speaking of Bancor, like the V3, right? So we have Celsius X coming up, and then we have Bancor 3. Maybe you guys might want to take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about them, if you don't mind. If you have a few more minutes, that is.
Yeah, sounds like we should definitely do something together, like a 3X, combination of V3 and Celsius X, So yeah, so I let me explain what Celsius X is, and then we can see if we can actually do something together. So we view the landscape, right, in crypto as kind of like basically everyone racing to launch their own blockchain, right? If you're watching, some of them are obviously Ethereum compatible, all the EVMs guys. Some of them are trying to build layer 0 like Polkadot, but each one of them basically is its own castle, right? And they're basically trying to steal either users or application or developers from other chains to try to create economic activity on their platforms, right? And up to now, it was a zero-sum game, meaning either you had like So, for example, Solana is trying to steal NFT business from Ethereum, right? That's kind of like their focus, um, and so on. So, what Celsius is focused on, I think Celsius is one of the very few kind of OG projects that did not launch its own blockchain, right? You look at crypto.com, they launched their own blockchain. Binance launched their own blockchain, and so on. So what we really are focused on is building roads and bridges, or building interconnectivity, and I'm talking about native interconnectivity between all the different platforms. So in February, late February, we're launching our first implementation. So this is going to be a Polygon implementation where you'll be able to basically deposit any asset in Celsius, and we support about 50 today. We're going to be supporting over 100 by the end of the year. Any of those 100 assets, and we will create a wrapped version or digital representation of that asset on Polygon, right? So you can take a Bitcoin and have a Bitcoin appear on Polygon, and we are partnering with Chainlink, for example, to provide use their protocol CCIP, cross chain interoperability protocol, to basically verify that we locked up a Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network and that we created the same value, and not more, not less, on the Polygon network. And then you can use that for any kind of economic activity. You can use it in on an AMM. You can use it on any kind of swaps. You can use it for yield farming, or any of the activities that are supported on that chain, right? So normally these would be done through bridges, and those are, again, very risky and very unreliable because of a variety of reasons. Again, you want to dig into it, see all the stuff that Vitalik wrote about it. When you issue it natively, there is almost no risk of hacking or of double spend or of basically you losing your asset on one side or the other, right? And the opportunity here is really to bridge the liquidity across all the different blockchains, instead of having all these blockchains compete with each other. So you can create any kind of innovation on any chain, and all the liquidity will flow there through these wrapped assets, or through this system like Celsius X, because it supports all the different blockchains. And so, for example, what we can do with Mark or Bancor is launch the Bancor protocol, the V3, on Cardano, or launch it on some other platform, and basically enable all this innovation that Bancor created, like basically the insurance, the against impermanent laws, all these different things that they're innovating. Extend that to community, and let the users decide, okay, what pairs we want to use it for. How do we transact? Which chain do we select? So you can effectively propagate that capability on many different chains without sacrificing any of the kind of, basically today it's all liquidity islands competing with each other. And that's why you have all these vampire attacks like SushiSwap and others, of people trying to steal from each other, versus just having a giant pool of liquidity that is interoperable across different chains.
I guess that's my cue to to talk about version 3. But yeah, that's these kinds of cross-chain solutions are something that I'm really paying close attention to. As I agree with Alex, by the way, and if anyone is constantly bridging assets between all of these different blockchains, just be aware of the risks, right? It's one of the great unsaid things I think in DeFi at the moment is just how likely it is that there's going to be a catastrophic hack on one of these bridges at some point in the future. It's hard to know, until the security problem is discovered. Of course, we don't know what it's going to be, but just the sheer amount of value that's moving back and forth over these things, and that these are still largely, they're solutions that we should have the minimum confidence in right now is frightening. But coming back to Bancor's version 3. I hope that at least a handful of people on the call have used our product previously. It's distinguished itself from other AMMs by offering two really important features from the user-facing standpoint, which is the ability to stake a single asset rather than baskets of assets. So what this means is if you're holding, for example, Link, and you want to provide liquidity with Link. If you were doing this on Uniswap or SushiSwap, you would have to combine it with something like ETH, and then provide both of those assets simultaneously to the liquidity pool. On Bancor's version 2.1, you don't need to do that. You can just provide the link, and the pool will create the other side of the pool on your behalf, and you guys become business partners, so to speak. The other thing that the Bancor protocol offers, which other dexes don't, is protection from impermanent loss. And what that means is that when you are providing liquidity on a generic dex, if the price of the two assets inside the pool diverge in any direction, you end up making a loss, which is kind of interesting because a lot of these protocols want to tell you that by providing liquidity, you're actually making money. But more often than not, that's actually not true. I've released a research paper earlier, actually towards the end of last year, sort of November last year, that was analyzing the impermanent loss on Uniswap v3, and we chose Uniswap v3 because it has astronomical volumes. Right, but I think the overwhelming majority of trading volume on Ethereum is processed via Uniswap v3, but it's still losing money hand over fist because of impermanent loss, and so it's a bad KPI in my opinion. And things like total fees should be something that is paid much more close attention to. But whatever, I digress. The point that I'm making is that on Bancor's version 2, you aren't exposed to impermanent loss. So if you provide a certain amount of Link on the first day of your stay on Bancor essentially insures the value of that Link over the entire course of you staying there. The only caveat to that is that you need to wait 100 days for the insurance policy to vest. Which means that if you're providing liquidity on Bancor, you really should be hanging out for at least 100 days in order to get the maximum value out of it. So with Bancor's version 3, we identified a couple of important pain points in version 2.1 that really should be addressed. One is that the amount of capital that the pools can receive is strictly limited by the DAO. This is a necessary component of version 2.1. Because there is no other place for liquidity to go except into the pools. And so if we are accepting, an infinite amount of liquidity for any one of the assets on the protocol, we also take on an implied infinite insurance liability for that asset, which can't be sustained. So the DAO has created set limits for how much liquidity is allowed, and that meant that the TVL growth of the protocol was also quite hampered, and it also meant that it was a disappointing experience for some users. No one likes to show up at a DEX and then be told that their money isn't good here, right, and be sent away. And for in many ways for a DEX, if TVL is one of the KPIs, it's also sort of self-destructive, I guess, in a way, not allowing the protocol to grow as large as it wanted to grow. So this was a contentious point. And on Bancor's version 3, because the liquidity pools are just a logic layer on top of a more general liquidity vault, the protocol can choose to make markets with a certain amount or a certain fraction of the liquidity that it has and do something else with the other liquidity that it has. And this means that we can actually open up the protocol to accept unlimited deposits. So the major thing that's been holding back the TVL growth of the Bancor protocol during the last year is going to go away, which I think is a terrific improvement for version 3. The other thing that's happening, from the user-facing perspective, is that 100-day insurance vesting period is getting replaced with a 7-day cooldown. So a shrinking of 100 days to 7 days is pretty significant, and I think that everyone can agree that that's a massive improvement. And because we moved that cooldown to the end, right? So you nominate when you want to withdraw, and that begins the cooldown. That means that all of the user positions are essentially the same, which brings back fungibility and composability. So whereas on version 2.1 that you weren't issued a pool token for your position, on version 3 you will, and that pool token is the first of its kind, right? It's a completely 100% single-sided liquidity token for a DEX. So it's pretty interesting the way that we've implemented that. A couple of other cool features coming along are the ability to support external and permanent loss protection. And we have already seen a couple of projects ask us about this. So in general, there are going to be some tokens like meme coins and other things that the Bancor DAO won't be interested in whitelisting just because they represent a catastrophic insurance risk. Shiba Girlfriend, which is a new meme coin that's kind of following on after the Floki and Shiba phenomenon, is one such example. And so they were seeking whitelisting status on Bancor, but then in acknowledging that their token could 100x or 1000x at any time, and that the Bancor DAO shouldn't have to wear that insurance risk, is offering up part of their own token supply to cover impermanent loss of the users that stake liquidity there. And so they've offered, I think, 5 billion Shiba GF tokens to cover that, and they're also providing 5 billion Shiba GF tokens of their own to bootstrap their pool in the first instance, which will be shared with the rest of their community as liquidity mining rewards. So we've got essentially this new mechanism that kind of helps the Bancor DAO to shoulder part of that insurance liability, which makes it easier for us to whitelist new tokens that we think are risky. And I think that's just about covered it. There are a couple of other sort of loose ends and important ins and outs to Bancor V3 that I wish I could discuss, but I think we're already getting a bit long in the tooth for this call, so I think I'll end it there. But certainly, I'm looking forward to collaborating with Celsius X on this this cross-chain liquidity model. That sounds like something that I have an immediate use for. So maybe we should get on a call.
Yep, we'll set it up. Also, we obviously have billions deployed on DeFi, so we should definitely also look at how we can incorporate some of the stuff you talked about to enhance more yield creation for our community. So I'll make sure that our teams get together.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you guys both so much. If you don't mind, I see Zendoc has been so patient, requested to speak. Do you guys mind taking a question? Great. I'm going to approve here. Zendoc, are you there still?
Zendoc.
Maybe not. In the meantime, I have a question.
But you have to unmute yourself, Zendoc.
Sometimes Twitter is a bit slow, honestly. It might not be his fault.
Okay, I have a question in the meantime. I've got a DM here. Can I mine Cell token?
Well, you can earn yield on Cell, yeah. So you can stake it with Celsius, and again, we're going to be adding additional capabilities where basically the Cell token can participate in rewards created to different pools through this Celsius X implementation. So if you hold Cell token, you'll be able to actually basically access enhanced yield on other platforms. So all that is still in the works, and we'll be publishing that. But we don't have any mining. We don't have any. We are an Ethereum ERC20 token, and basically the token gives you many different utilities. The main ones are that you earn 25%, up to 25% more yield if you earn and sell instead of you earning in kind, and you get to take loans at a lower basically interest rate, as well as if you doing swaps, for example. We have fee-free, um, spread-free swaps inside the wallet, and you can basically with different tiers. The platinum tier now is going to go up to you can do up to $200,000 free swaps every day. So those are all huge benefits that you get if you hold sell token.
Great. Thank you, Socknug. You've requested to speak. If you want to unmute yourself, go for it.
Sweet. Hi. Hi, Jen. Hi, Alex. Hi, Mark. Been loving the discussion. Always a pleasure to get to talk to you, Alex. So I just came from earlier. There was a DeFi Toronto featuring Everest, which is a decentralized identity protocol. And the CEO of that company was really kind of harping on regulations becoming really, really clear this year in the DeFi ecosystem. And we've seen stuff like 1inch start to deploy completely separate US DeFi entities. So I kind of wanted to ask, how do you see zero knowledge proofs and decentralized identity affecting DeFi compliance?
Yeah, so it's a complex question. I think you're going to see that bifurcation. You're going to see projects basically decide that they want to be fully compliant, and again, Bancor, 1inch are all examples of all that stuff, right? Collaborating with regulators, following or sticking to very kind of strict rules of what they think are minimum requirements for any kind of DeFi launch. And at the same time, you're going to have projects that completely ignore all of that and think that none of the rules apply to them. And so we're going to see what happens. I mean, Celsius, for example, is an investor in 1inch, right? So we obviously support that interpretation or that process, which I think we follow as well, where we kind of separate US and non-US. You're seeing FTX and Binance and everybody else doing the same thing. So it's really going to come down to what happens to Luna and other people who basically don't have any separation, don't have any of this KYC ML or reporting or the travel rule, all these things that are now required implemented, right? So there are, regulators only have certain coverage as far as jurisdictional coverage. So there is a lot of uncertainty here from international law. Again, we believe that you have to be a good actor from day one, right? You don't come and ask for forgiveness. Usually that doesn't work. And I think you saw Gensler talk about, being much more aggressive with exchanges, and he's not just talking about U.S. exchanges, right? He's also talking about people that operate offshore, that provide leverage and basically wreck people's lives. So I think there's going to be a crackdown on all these guys that kind of like hiding on this or that island and think that none of these rules apply to them.
So
I want to follow that up just quickly by saying that the kind of stuff that Alex was talking about, like the high leverage exchanges and other things, and also like there's other sort of criminal behavior associated with some of the old school crypto exchanges that I think is also what Gensler was referring to. But in general, like if you're thinking about just the kind of stuff that DeFi is doing, like you referred to 1inch before, I just want to add a perspective there that the US has always considered itself the innovation leader of the world. And I don't think that they're going to back down now. I think that right now it's really just a friction point, I think, where there is I don't want to say an incumbent regulator, but, certainly a legal entity, a government entity that's still observing the inertia of like the last few hundred years of regulation. And it's going to take time for it to change, but I actually am expecting it to change. I don't think that the SEC is soft, right? I think that they want everyone to know who's in charge, and that's important. But I don't think that they will let the US become sort of a footnote in the developing DeFi narrative. I think that they will eventually take a more proactive approach, but it'll be sort of more on their terms. But I don't think that it's ever going to be, that America isn't allowed to participate forever, sort of thing. I think that would be a naive conclusion.
So the reason why I like bring up the whole decentralized identity thing is because there's a big crossroad I've found in like crypto users wanting to remain pseudo anonymous and regulators wanting to know who they're working with. So I really appreciate your guys' input there, and thank you for your time, and thank you for holding the space, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. If anybody else has any questions, by the way, please request to ask. I know we're running on an hour and a half here, so I don't want to keep Alex and Mark too long. But you can either DM me. I just looked. I don't have any other questions currently.
That's fine. If anyone's too shy for the call, I always wanted to remind people that I can be reached via DM on my Twitter account anyway. So if you are get stage fright or you're afraid of public speaking or something, you can reach out to me privately via text, and that's fine as well.
I have William here. I just gave him the floor. It looks like you have a question, William. Go for it.
Hey, Mark. I had a question quick about what you foresee the change in yields in V3. If you can, when you spoke about the fact that the pools have become unlimited, let's say I'm in a link pool and I have like 1,000 link in there right now. Once that becomes, the ceiling rises, won't the yields become much lower?
Yeah, so it's a reasonable expectation. I don't think it's going to become much lower. I think that the market has a way of establishing a fairly decent equilibrium for these things. And the Bancor DAO has also been pretty good about managing the pool so far. I think that if we did end up in a situation where, the trading liquidity on a pool was like, 1/10 of the available liquidity that the protocol had, the DAO would be very quick to annex that opportunity. And I can cite recent evidence for just how well the DAO is doing. We've been running a bunch of fee optimization experiments where we're looking at different KPIs, different metrics, but with a focus on the bottom line. And just the last couple of weeks, it's really come to light that that you can have a much higher fee on a lot of these liquidity pools and tolerate a much lower volume while still making more money. So, for example, on the track liquidity pool, we experimented with moving the swap fee, I think starting at 0.2%, and then slowly moving it up to 4%, and then back down to 2%. To try and get an idea of what the effect on volume is, whether or not it affects profitability. And the short answer there is we were able to increase revenue by about 135% on about 30% less volume, which is an outstanding result, actually. So we're always going to be, I'd say Bancor more than any other AMM is paying attention to the bottom line. And that includes making sure that our insurance policies are sustainable and things like that. So yeah, it's possible. Like, it's certainly a reasonable deduction that you've made. that if there's a huge amount of link liquidity pouring in, and the trading liquidity isn't growing with it, then the APR could drop. But I honestly doubt it. I think that what it means is that if there's a huge amount of link liquidity there, that's link liquidity that's not on some other exchange. And so we can start to optimize that fee a little bit more, so as to make sure that the APR is stable and within what the community is expecting there. I've also said that we also have plans, pending the Chainlink staking upgrade, to use excess Chainlink tokens to generate yield for liquidity providers on Chainlink's own network. And so that should be another source of APR, another source of revenue that doesn't expose those tokens to IL risk, although it may expose them to slashing risk, which is something else that we need to consider. But yeah, it's not you shouldn't be worried about it. There's going to be sort of a learning period where we are going to have to optimize the pools in order to accommodate that inrush of liquidity that I think that you are referring to. But honestly, I think that's a good problem to have. I've already put together. I've got like 6 or 7 interviews this week for data scientists and machine learning engineers who are helping me put together a dashboard to manage exactly this. So I don't want you to think for a second that we would ever want the APR to be a side note, right? That's the opposite of what we're doing. What we're trying to do is just to make sure that it's sustainable. And can last forever, right? So yeah, don't worry about it. But if it's ever the case that that there's so much link liquidity in there that it's no longer profitable, I imagine that the market will do what it does today, which is that some people will get bored with it and they'll seek an opportunity elsewhere, and then whatever opportunity that they're moving to, the APR over there will start to decrease. The market has a way of always kind of balancing itself out and establishing equilibrium that way. So I don't see it as being necessarily a huge problem. But yeah, we will do our best to make sure that that we optimize it and have a solid APR for as many liquidity providers as possible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Alex, I have a question for you. What is the main reason you would say makes Celsius X the future hub of interoperability in the crypto space?
Well, the basic answer is there's no fees, right? There's the largest liquidity pool in crypto right now, single largest pool that goes across chains, and Celsius standing behind it, right? So obviously, we recently raised $750 million. We have very strong balance sheet. We, are standing behind the product. So you have to decide, like Mark said, do you want to trust some bridge that someone wrote and go and audit their code, or do you want to and pay a fee, or do you want to use a platform that is fee free and the Celsius stands behind it with almost unlimited liquidity, right? So for 100 different assets. So I think the again, it's not CEFI or DeFi. The question is the combination of the two gonna convince many to switch or to move their assets from TradFi to this new world, and can we deliver in a safe and sustainable way the services that these people are looking for: loans, yield, swapping services, and so on. So the answer is yes. We plan to win that space because we've been acting in the best interest of the community for the last 4.5 years, and we plan to continue doing that. And this is what it's all about.
Great. Thank you so much. I have one more question. Mark, I'm going to read this directly. So will Bancor 3 LP tokens accrue yield internally or externally? And how does that impact tax treatment of providing liquidity to Bancor 3? For example, if I have high unrealized gain in Link, I don't want to trigger a taxable transaction when providing liquidity. And we lost him. Let's see.
All right, I gotta drop off, but appreciate everybody joining and asking questions, and don't forget to join the Celsius AMA tomorrow at 1:00 on YouTube. And thanks, Jen and Mark, who's hopefully gonna join soon, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the next